A rancher ruled his land with cruelty. His dog knew only fear and pain. But in the Wild West, karma always finds its way.
This isn't just about a mistreated dog. It's about the day justice came on 4 legs and revenge was served cold.
The Brennan Ranch sat in a valley surrounded by hills in 1883. It was one of the largest cattle operations in Colorado Territory. Over 2,000 head of cattle grazed on Brennan land. The ranch house was big and imposing, like a fortress. Wooden fences stretched for miles in every direction, perfectly maintained. Barns and bunkhouses dotted the property like small towns. Ranch hands worked from dawn until dusk without complaint ever. They knew better than to complain about anything, at all. Thomas Brennan ruled his ranch with absolute power and cruelty. His word was law, and his fist was quick. Men who crossed him found themselves beaten, or worse sometimes. The town of Red Creek, 5 miles away, feared him. The sheriff wouldn't cross him, even when he should. Brennan owned half the businesses in town through intimidation. He was a man who took what he wanted, and he kept what he took, through fear alone.
Brennan had a cattle dog that worked the ranch daily. The dog was a blue heeler mix with intelligence in his eyes. He was 4 years old and had worked cattle since puppyhood. The dog had no name that anyone used regularly. Brennan just called him Dog or Mutt when he bothered. The dog was the best cattle herder on the entire ranch. He could move 100 head alone without any help. He knew every inch of the property like his own paws. He could find stray cattle in the roughest terrain quickly. But Brennan didn't appreciate the dog's work or loyalty. He saw the dog as just another tool to use. When the dog worked well, Brennan ignored him completely. When the dog made the slightest mistake, Brennan beat him. The dog had scars across his back from the whip. He had rope burns on his neck from being tied. His ribs showed from being underfed constantly and deliberately. Ranch hands felt sorry for the dog, but stayed silent. One morning, the dog was herding cattle near the north pasture. A young steer broke from the herd suddenly and unexpectedly. The dog chased after it immediately across rough ground. He cornered the steer against a fence line perfectly, but the steer was spooked and jumped the fence anyway. The dog had done everything right in the situation. Any experienced rancher would know that sometimes cattle panic, but Brennan saw only that a steer had escaped. He rode up on his black horse with fury. "Useless mutt!" he screamed at the dog standing there. The dog cowered, knowing what was coming next surely. Brennan dismounted and grabbed his whip from the saddle. "I'll teach you to let my cattle escape." The whip cracked across the dog's back viciously and without mercy. Once, twice, 3 times, the dog yelped but didn't run away from the beating. He had learned running made it worse, always. Maria Brennan watched from the ranch house with tears forming. She was Thomas Brennan's only daughter from his late wife. Maria had her mother's kindness in a house of cruelty. She hated how her father treated the dog constantly. She had tried arguing with him about it before. "Father, the dog works so hard for you," she'd said. Brennan had turned on her with cold eyes then. "Don't tell me how to run my ranch, girl. The dog is property, nothing more than that." Maria had learned to help the dog in secret instead. She would sneak him food when her father wasn't looking. She would give him water on hot days quietly. She would clean his wounds when Brennan left him bleeding. The dog knew Maria was different from her father completely. When she approached, his tail would wag slightly, despite the pain. She was the only kindness he knew in his life. That afternoon, Brennan had business in Red Creek town. He rode off with 2 of his men. Maria waited until they were gone from sight completely. Then she went to the barn where the dog lay. He was curled up in a corner, licking his wounds. "Oh, you poor thing," Maria whispered while approaching gently. She had brought medical supplies and food with her. She cleaned the whip marks carefully with water and cloth. The dog whimpered but let her work without resistance. "I'm so sorry," Maria said with tears falling. "I wish I could take you away from here." She fed him pieces of dried beef tenderly. The dog ate gratefully while watching her with those intelligent eyes. Maria stroked his head gently between his alert ears. "One day, things will be different," she promised him. "One day he'll get what he deserves for this." The dog seemed to understand her words somehow deeply. 2 weeks later, Brennan's cruelty reached a new terrible level. A group of cattle had wandered into the rocky hills. The dog went to bring them back as usual, but the terrain was treacherous with loose rocks everywhere. The dog worked carefully, moving the cattle slowly and safely. It took longer than usual because of the danger. Brennan was waiting at the ranch when they returned. "What took you so long?" he demanded with fury. The dog had done excellent work in difficult conditions, but Brennan didn't care about that at all. He grabbed the dog by the scruff roughly. "I think you're getting lazy and worthless now." He dragged the dog to a post and tied him. "You'll stay here without food or water tonight. Maybe that'll teach you to work faster tomorrow." Maria watched from her window with horror and helplessness. She couldn't help the dog with her father there watching. The dog spent the night tied to the post. The temperature dropped, and he shivered in the cold. The next morning, Maria woke before dawn as planned. She crept outside to where the dog was tied. He was shivering and weak from the cold night. "I'm here," she whispered while untying him quickly. She had brought a blanket and food hidden under her shawl. She wrapped the blanket around the dog's shaking body. She fed him and gave him water desperately. "I can't let this continue," she said with determination, "but I don't know what to do about Father." The dog looked at her with those knowing brown eyes. There was something building in those eyes now, she noticed. Not just fear and pain anymore. Something else was growing there, slowly. Something that looked almost like calculation. Like the dog was planning something himself. Maria didn't understand it then, fully, but she would understand it very soon.
What Maria didn't know was this important truth, actually. The dog wasn't just enduring the abuse any more passively. He was watching. He was learning. He was remembering every single cruel act. Dogs have long memories, especially intelligent working dogs like him. And this dog was very intelligent indeed. He had been noting patterns in Brennan's behavior carefully. When Brennan drank heavily, he became careless about things. When Brennan rode alone, he was vulnerable to danger. When Brennan's temper flared, he made mistakes in judgment. The dog was cataloging all of this information silently, because somewhere deep in his animal brain, a plan was forming. Not a plan of escape, a plan of something else entirely. Something that would make Thomas Brennan pay dearly. The question wasn't if karma would come anymore. The question was when. The dog would deliver it himself.
3 days later, a massive storm rolled into the valley unexpectedly. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains like gathering armies preparing for war. Thunder rumbled across the hills, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. Rain began falling in heavy sheets, making visibility nearly impossible for anyone. The wind howled through the valley, bending trees and rattling buildings. Brennan was out checking the cattle in the north pasture as usual. He had taken the dog with him like he always did. The rain made the ground slippery and treacherous very quickly now. The cattle were spooked by the thunder and lightning flashing overhead. They scattered in different directions across the dangerous terrain without control. The dog worked tirelessly to keep them together despite the terrible conditions. But it was nearly impossible in the storm's increasing fury. Brennan cursed and shouted orders that couldn't be heard over thunder. His black horse was nervous and hard to control properly. The dog managed to gather most of the cattle together successfully, but 3 steers broke away toward the rocky cliffs dangerously. Brennan saw them, and his rage exploded despite the obvious danger.
"Get after them, you worthless mutt!" Brennan screamed into the howling storm. The dog hesitated for just one brief moment only. The cliffs were dangerous in good weather and deadly now in rain. Going after the steers could mean death for the dog, certainly. Loose rocks made every step potentially fatal on the cliffs. The visibility was almost zero through the sheets of rain. But Brennan raised his whip threateningly in the pouring rain. "Go now, or I'll beat you until you can't walk anymore." The dog made a decision in that critical split-second moment. He ran after the 3 panicked steers toward the rocky cliffs. The rain pounded down, making every step difficult and dangerous. The steers were panicked and running blind toward the edge ahead. The dog caught up to them near a dangerous drop finally. He managed to turn 2 of them back successfully toward safety, but the 3rd steer was too close to the cliff edge. The ground gave way beneath the steer's weight suddenly and completely. The steer fell over the cliff, bellowing in terror loudly. Brennan witnessed this from a distance through the heavy rain. His face turned purple with absolute rage and fury immediately.
Brennan rode up to the cliff edge where the dog stood. "You lost my steer," he screamed while dismounting his horse roughly. The dog had risked his life in impossible storm conditions bravely. He had saved 2 steers from certain death over the cliff, but Brennan saw only the 1 steer that was lost. He advanced on the dog with the whip raised high, threateningly. "I'll teach you a lesson you'll never forget today." The whip came down hard across the dog's already scarred back, again and again in the pouring rain without any mercy. The dog took the brutal beating without trying to escape, but something fundamental changed in his eyes during that beating clearly. Something deep shifted inside him at that precise moment. The fear was still there in his intelligent brown eyes, but now it was mixed with something much darker and colder, something calculating and patient and waiting for the right moment. The dog would remember this beating forever in perfect detail. Every strike of the whip was cataloged in his memory. This was the moment everything changed for the dog completely.
After the savage beating, Brennan tied the dog to a tree trunk. "You'll stay here in the storm tonight," he said with cold cruelty. "Maybe you'll learn to do better tomorrow or die trying." Brennan mounted his black horse and rode away without looking back. He left the dog tied in the freezing rain deliberately. The temperature continued to drop rapidly as night approached quickly now. The dog shivered violently as the cold penetrated his soaking wet fur. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating his suffering periodically in bright flashes. Thunder crashed so loud it shook the ground beneath. But the dog's mind was working clearly through the cold and pain. He watched Brennan's retreating figure very carefully through the storm. He noticed how Brennan's horse stumbled repeatedly on the slippery ground. He noticed how Brennan wasn't watching where he was going carefully. He noticed the dangerous ravine that Brennan was riding parallel to. The ravine had a steep drop with sharp rocks below. The dog's eyes narrowed as he observed and calculated everything carefully. He could have barked a warning about the approaching danger. He could have alerted Brennan to the treacherous ground ahead. He didn't make a single sound at all.
Hours passed slowly, and Maria became increasingly worried about her father. The storm was getting worse by the minute with no signs. She hadn't seen him return to the ranch house at all. The sky was completely dark now, and the rain fell harder. She put on her heavy raincoat and went to the barn. The ranch hands were huddled inside, sheltering from the terrible weather. "Has anyone seen my father?" she asked with growing concern. One ranch hand shook his head nervously and uncomfortably. "He went north to check cattle, Miss Maria. That was hours ago now." Maria felt fear grip her chest tightly, like a vice. And the dog? Did the dog come back with him? The ranch hand looked very uncomfortable answering that particular question. No, ma'am, the dog ain't back either at all. Maria made a quick decision despite the obvious danger outside. Saddle my horse immediately. I'm going to look for him now. The ranch hands protested strongly and with genuine concern. Miss Maria, it's too dangerous out there in this storm. But Maria was already preparing to leave immediately and urgently.
Maria rode into the storm toward the north pasture area. The rain blinded her, and the wind threatened to throw her. She called out for her father repeatedly, without any answer. She searched for over an hour in the complete darkness. The lightning provided the only light to see by occasionally. Finally, she saw something through the rain and lightning ahead. The dog was still tied to the tree, shivering badly. "Oh my God!" Maria gasped, while dismounting her horse quickly. She ran to the dog and untied him immediately with shaking hands. "Where's my father?" she asked desperately while looking around. The dog looked at her with those strange, calculating brown eyes. Then he did something unexpected and very deliberate indeed. He turned and started walking toward the ravine slowly and purposefully. Maria followed him through the storm with growing dread building. She had a terrible feeling about what she would find. The dog led her with determination through the rain and darkness. He knew exactly where he was going without hesitation.
The dog led Maria to the edge of a steep, rocky ravine. She looked down carefully, and her heart stopped completely with horror. Brennan's black horse was at the bottom of the ravine below. The horse was injured but alive and standing there, but Brennan himself was lying motionless on the sharp rocks. "Father!" Maria screamed down into the darkness below desperately. She could see he was unconscious and badly hurt from here. The fall had been severe and dangerous from this height. Blood was visible even in the darkness and rain. Maria looked at the dog standing beside her very calmly. "How long has he been down there?" she asked breathlessly. The dog just looked at her without any expression showing. Maria realized with growing horror the terrible truth of the situation. The dog had been tied to that tree for hours. He could see the ravine clearly from where he was tied. He must have seen Brennan fall during the storm earlier. And the dog had done absolutely nothing to alert anyone, had made no sound at all to help or warn. Maria stared at the dog in the pouring rain and lightning. "You knew," she whispered, with realization dawning clearly now. "You knew he fell, and you said nothing at all." The dog met her gaze steadily, without guilt or shame visible. Just cold calculation and justice burning in those intelligent brown eyes. Maria understood in that critical moment what had really happened here. Her father's years of cruelty had finally created something terrible and unstoppable. The dog hadn't caused Brennan's fall directly at all, physically. The horse had simply slipped on the wet ground, naturally. But the dog had chosen not to prevent it by staying silent. He had chosen not to alert anyone to the danger beforehand. He had chosen to let nature take its course, finally and completely. He had watched Brennan ride toward danger and done nothing. That was his revenge, cold and calculated and perfect. Maria should have felt anger at the dog for this. But instead, she felt something else entirely, and surprisingly now. She felt that her father had earned this fate through cruelty.
Maria looked down at her father, lying unconscious and bleeding far below in the ravine. The rain continued to pour down relentlessly on both of them. "We need to get help," she said finally to the dog, standing calmly beside her. "But you and I both know that terrible truth completely, don't we, boy?" The dog's tail wagged once,
just slightly, in clear acknowledgement of her words. Maria made her decision quickly, despite everything she now understood about what happened. "Stay here," she commanded the dog firmly, while mounting her wet horse. She needed help to rescue her father from the ravine below, immediately. The storm was still raging around them, but she rode as fast as safely possible. When she reached the ranch buildings, she gathered the ranch hands immediately and urgently. "My father fell into the North Ravine. We need ropes and help now." The men scrambled to gather equipment and horses in the darkness and rain. Within 20 minutes, a full rescue party was riding back toward the ravine location. Maria led them through the continuing storm with determination and focused purpose. The dog was still there when they arrived, sitting calmly by the cliff edge. He hadn't moved an inch from that spot the entire time. He was waiting and watching, like a silent guardian over the scene.
The ranch hands worked quickly to lower thick ropes into the steep ravine carefully. 2 strong men descended down the slippery rock face to reach Brennan's broken body. It took nearly an hour in the terrible storm to bring him up. The ropes kept slipping on the wet rocks dangerously and repeatedly. Brennan was unconscious but alive and still breathing somehow, miraculously. His right leg was broken badly, at an unnatural angle clearly. He had a deep head wound that was bleeding profusely still. His face was pale from blood loss and shock combined. "We need to get him to the doctor in Red Creek immediately," Maria shouted over the howling storm wind. They'd carefully loaded Brennan onto a makeshift stretcher between 2 horses for transport. The journey back to the ranch took another full hour through thick mud. Maria rode beside her unconscious father the entire way back without leaving. She held his hand and talked to him, even though he couldn't hear. The dog followed behind the group silently and without any expression showing. He watched everything with those intelligent, calculating brown eyes constantly. When they reached the ranch house, they loaded Brennan into a wagon immediately. Maria climbed in beside him as the driver prepared horses to leave. She looked back at the dog, standing in the rain watching them. Their eyes met for a long, meaningful moment of complete understanding. Then the wagon rolled away toward Red Creek Town and the doctor there. 3 long days passed before Brennan finally regained consciousness in his bed. The doctor had set his broken leg with wooden splints and bandages. He had stitched his head wound with careful precision and skill. "You're very lucky to be alive, Thomas," the doctor said seriously and firmly. "That was a very bad fall you took in the storm." Brennan's eyes opened slowly, and he looked around confused at first, completely. His head throbbed with terrible pain that made thinking difficult and slow. "What happened to me?" he asked weakly and with obvious pain. Maria was sitting in a chair beside his bed faithfully, and had been. She had barely left his side for 3 entire days now. "Your horse slipped in the storm," she explained carefully and quietly to him. "You fell into the North Ravine. We found you hours later." Brennan tried to remember events, but his memory was foggy and very unclear. Images came in fragments that didn't connect properly in his injured mind. "The dog," he said suddenly with some urgency. "Where's the dog? Was he there at the ravine?" Maria hesitated before answering that particular question carefully and thoughtfully. "Yes, Father, the dog was there, tied to the tree. He led me to you, eventually." Brennan's face showed deep confusion at those specific words she chose. "He led you to me? Why didn't he come get help earlier?" Maria looked at her father lying helpless and vulnerable in the bed. For the first time in her entire life, he looked weak and powerless. The man who had ruled through fear was now dependent on others. "The dog was tied to a tree, Father," she said with very careful emphasis. You tied him there yourself, in the rain. Remember? You left him in the freezing storm as punishment for losing one steer." The words hung heavily in the air between them, significantly and ominously. Brennan's weathered face changed as memory slowly returned to him in painful pieces. He remembered the vicious beating he had given the dog with his whip. He remembered tying him to the tree in the freezing rain deliberately. He remembered riding away and leaving him there to suffer alone overnight. He remembered the dog's eyes watching him leave without expression or plea. "He could have barked," Brennan said slowly, with terrible dawning realization. "He could have warned me about the ravine ahead of me." Maria met her father's eyes directly and without flinching away now. "Yes, he could have easily. But why would he, Father? After everything you've done to him over the years consistently?"
Brennan stared at his daughter as the full, terrible truth hit him. The dog had chosen silence deliberately and with purpose. The dog had chosen revenge in the only way available to him. The dog had let him ride toward danger without warning at all. The dog had watched him fall and made no sound to help. The dog had waited tied to that tree while Brennan lay bleeding. The dog had delivered justice in the cruelest possible way imaginable, by doing nothing at all when he could have done something. Brennan felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm room. He had created this through his own cruelty and actions. He had pushed the dog to this point of calculated revenge. "Where is the dog now?" Brennan asked with something new in his voice. Fear. Maria heard it clearly. "He's in the barn, resting," she answered. "And Father, his name is Justice now. I named him that, because that's exactly what he delivered to you that night."
Brennan spent 6 long weeks recovering in bed, unable to walk or work at all. His broken leg healed slowly and painfully every single day without relief. The doctor visited weekly to check on his progress and change bandages. During that extended time, something changed dramatically on the ranch, and noticeably. Maria took over running all the ranch operations with unexpected skill and natural authority. She managed the cattle, the ranch hands, the finances, and everything else. The ranch hands respected her far more than they ever respected Brennan before. She was fair and kind where her father had been cruel and harsh. She listened to their concerns and treated them like human beings. The cattle still needed herding daily, and Justice still worked them perfectly. But now Maria was the one giving him commands and gentle direction. She never raised her voice to Justice or lifted a hand toward him. She treated him with respect and kindness, always, without any exception whatsoever. Justice responded by working harder than he ever had before in his life. He seemed to understand that things had changed fundamentally on the ranch now. The fear was gone and replaced with mutual respect and partnership. When Brennan finally recovered enough to walk with a wooden cane supporting him, he returned to work slowly. But everything was different now, and he knew it immediately upon stepping outside. The ranch hands no longer feared him the same way as they had before. They respected Maria and followed her leadership naturally without question. Maria had proven she could run things better without his cruelty and intimidation. And Justice, the Gog, watched Brennan with those intelligent, calculating brown eyes constantly and carefully. Brennan never raised his voice to Justice again after that day, ever. He never lifted his whip or his hand in anger toward him again. Not because he had learned compassion or kindness through his suffering and pain, but because he was genuinely afraid now of what might happen next time. He had learned that cruelty breeds consequences, eventually and inevitably, always. He had learned that even animals remember, and can choose their own justice. One quiet afternoon, Brennan watched Justice herding cattle across the north pasture perfectly and efficiently. Maria stood beside her father, observing the excellent work being done without errors. "He's the best cattle dog in all of Colorado Territory," Maria said with obvious pride. "Always has been the best. You just never appreciated him properly before this happened." Brennan said nothing, but his hand tightened on his wooden cane, unconsciously and nervously.
He remembered lying broken in that ravine in the rain and complete darkness. He remembered the dog's deliberate silence that had nearly killed him completely and permanently. "Sometimes," Maria continued quietly and thoughtfully, "karma doesn't need our help to arrive at someone's door. It just needs patience and the right moment to strike hard." Brennan looked at his daughter with new understanding and perhaps genuine fear now. She had changed during his recovery period, dramatically. She was stronger now and wouldn't tolerate his cruelty any more toward anything or anyone. The dog had taught them both a profound lesson that day in the storm. Justice always comes eventually, to everyone. Sometimes it arrives on 4 legs instead of 2. And when it does arrive, it never forgets the debts that need to be paid. Justice the dog sat on the hill overlooking the entire ranch as the sun set. His scars remained visible, but his eyes were peaceful now, finally, after years of went. He had delivered his message clearly, and it had been received and understood. The cruel man had learned his lesson at last through suffering, and the dog had found his justice in the only way he could, not through violence, but through calculated silence and patience, through choosing carefully when to act and when to let nature take its course. That was the truest justice of all in the end.